2 months from now, Linnea Northgate will be lying on this same rooftop with the Alpha King's head resting against her shoulder and her star chart spread across both their laps, and she will think, "This is the truest map I've ever drawn." Not because the constellations are accurate, because the man beside her learned every one of their names just so he could talk to her about the things she loved. But that's later. That's after everything. This is before, 2 months earlier. The roof of Moorcroft Palace was not meant for climbing. It was meant for looking at, from a respectful distance, preferably while bowing. It rose in terraced slate peaks above the capital like something carved from the night itself, edged in copper, guttering gone green with age, and on a clear evening the highest terrace offered an unobstructed view of the northern sky that no observatory in 3 territories could match. Linnea knew this because she'd spent 4 days studying the palace's architecture from the rooftop of the inn across the square, charting sightlines with a borrowed spyglass and calculating angles of elevation in the margins of her field journal. She knew which terrace caught the least lamplight. She knew which drainage pipe ran close enough to a window ledge to serve as a foothold. She knew that the guards changed positions at the top of every hour, and that there was a 7-minute gap between the East Patrol's departure and the West Patrol's arrival. She was not, by any reasonable definition, a criminal. She was a celestial cartographer. She mapped stars for a living, selling her charts to navigators and scholars and to anyone willing to pay for accuracy. She'd spent 3 years traveling alone through the outer territories with nothing but a pack, a telescope, and a stubbornness that her mother had once described as either her greatest strength or the thing that would get her imprisoned. Tonight, it might be both. She pulled herself over the copper gutter and onto the slate tiles, breathing hard. The night air hit her like cold water, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't arrived yet and wood smoke from somewhere far below. Her silver blonde hair, loose and wind-tangled past her shoulders, caught the moonlight as she straightened. She wiped her palms on her dark wool trousers and looked up, and forgot how to breathe. The sky. The entire sky, spread above her like a map drawn by something older and vaster than she could comprehend. No lamplight, no chimney smoke, no tree line, just stars, thousands of them, blazing in the darkness with a clarity that made her chest ache. The Archer's Belt, the Wolf's Eye, the River of Souls, that great pale ribbon of light that her mother used to say was the path the dead walk to find their way home. She sank to her knees on the slate, not from exhaustion, from awe. Her hands were already moving. She pulled her field journal from the satchel slung across her body and flipped to a fresh page, then uncapped her ink pen with a practiced twist. The charting grid she'd pre-drawn caught the moonlight just enough to work by. She began to plot. Quick, precise marks. The angle of the Archer's Belt relative to the palace's north face. The position of the Wolf's Eye, which had shifted 2 degrees east since her last measurement in the border hills. The faint cluster she'd been tracking for months, the one that didn't appear on any existing chart. The one she was beginning to suspect was a previously unmapped constellation. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps. Room for 2? Linnea's pen skidded across the page. She spun on her knees, heart slamming into her throat, and found herself staring up at a man standing 3 paces behind her on the slate terrace with his hands in his pockets, and an expression that suggested he was more amused than alarmed. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested the kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself. His hair was deep umber, cropped close at the sides with the longer top falling across his forehead in a way that looked deliberately careless. He wore a dark linen shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, no coat, no insignia, no crown, and his feet were bare on the cold slate. But his eyes, dark jade green, catching the moonlight like river stones, and looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle from her wrists to her collarbones. "I'm not," she started, "not supposed to be here?" He tilted his head. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The shape of one, held back. Neither am I, technically. The steward says the roof tiles are unstable. He glanced down at the slate beneath his bare feet. They seem fine to me. Linnea's mind was racing. He wasn't wearing a guard's uniform. He wasn't shouting for help. He was standing on the roof of the Alpha King's palace at midnight with no shoes on, looking at her like she was interesting rather than criminal. "Who are you?" she asked. "Callum." He said it simply. No title, no family name. Just the word, offered like a hand extended. "You?" She should lie. She should absolutely lie. She was trespassing on royal property with a satchel full of celestial charts and ink-stained fingers and no plausible excuse. But something about the way he said his name, easy and unguarded, like he had nothing to prove, made the lie dissolve before she could shape it. Linnea. Linnea. He repeated it like he was tasting the sound. Then he nodded toward her journal. "What are you drawing?" "Stars." His eyebrows lifted, not mockingly, with genuine interest that shifted something in his expression, opened it, made him look younger. "From the roof of the palace? It's the best vantage point in the capital." She heard how that sounded and winced. I know that's not an excuse for... It's the best vantage point in 3 territories, actually." He walked closer, not crowding her, moving with the kind of deliberate ease that suggested he was aware of how much space he took up and was being careful about it. He lowered himself onto the slate beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, and looked up at the sky. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between 2 people who are both looking at the same vast, impossible thing and feeling small in the same way. "That cluster," he said, pointing, "the one just east of the Wolf's Eye. It doesn't appear on the navigation charts in the palace library." She stared at him. "You've looked. I've looked." He turned those jade-green eyes on her, and the moonlight caught something in them, a depth that went beyond curiosity, that looked almost like recognition. "I noticed it was missing about a year ago. I asked the court astronomer and he told me I was imagining things." "You weren't imagining things?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended, the professional indignation overriding the part of her brain that was screaming about trespassing. "It's real. I've been tracking it for 9 months. It's a previously unmapped formation, at least 6 stars, possibly 8. The court astronomer is using charts that haven't been updated in 40 years. Something moved across his face. Surprise? Delight? A warmth that softened the sharp lines of his jaw. "Show me." So she did. She didn't mean to spend an hour on that rooftop. She meant to show him the cluster, accept whatever consequences were coming for the trespassing, and disappear into the capital before dawn. But Callum asked questions. Real questions. Not the polite, glazed-over kind she got from merchants who bought her charts without reading them. He asked about methodology, about the difference between parallax measurement and direct observation, about why the outer territory charts diverged from the capital standard and whether that was a calibration issue or a political one. She answered. She answered with the kind of detail she never got to use because nobody ever wanted it, and somewhere between the wolf's eye and the archer's belt, she forgot to be afraid of him. His hand brushed hers when he reached for the journal. Accidental. Just his fingers grazing her knuckles as he turned the page to see her field sketches. Light bloomed. Faint. Golden. A soft luminescence that spread from the point of contact across both their hands like sunrise through water. Linnea gasped and pulled back. The glow faded instantly. Callum went very still. He looked at his hand, then at hers, then at her face, and the expression in his dark jade eyes was something she couldn't parse. Not surprise, something deeper. Something that looked like a door opening. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "Yes." His voice had changed. Lower, rougher. the casual ease stripped away to reveal something underneath that was raw and unsteady. Pauses. Linnea, I need to tell you something. You're not just Callum. No. The silence thickened. Below them, the palace slept. Above them, the stars turned on their ancient axes, indifferent and eternal. Callum Moorcroft, she said. The name fell out of her mouth like a stone. The Alpha King. He didn't deny it. He sat on the cold slate with his bare feet and his pushed-up sleeves and his dark umber hair falling across his forehead, and he looked at her with those impossible eyes and said, I come up here because it's the only place in this palace where no one performs for me. I didn't expect to find someone who looks at stars the way I do. Pauses. I should have told you immediately. I'm sorry. She should run. She should gather her satchel and her charts and her dignity and climb back down the drainage pipe and vanish into the capital like smoke. She was a nomad, a wanderer. She answered to no one and slept under open skies and had built her entire life around the principle that freedom was the only thing worth having. But the glow, the light that had bloomed between their hands like something alive. She couldn't outrun that. The light, she said. What was that? I think you know. She did. She'd read about it in the old texts, the ones the scholars dismissed as folklore, a luminescence bond, visible only to the two it belonged to, a light that existed in the space between fated mates, as real and undeniable as gravity. I need to go, she said. He let her. That was the part that undid her. He didn't argue, didn't command, didn't reach for her, or remind her that she was trespassing and he could have her arrested. He sat on the roof of his own palace and watched her stand with her satchel clutched to her chest and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. And he said, The East Terrace has better sightlines for the river formation. If you come back. If, not when. She climbed down the drainage pipe and didn't look back. She came back the next night. She told herself it was for the cluster. The unmapped formation needed western angle measurements, and the palace rooftop was the only viable position for the calculation she needed. It had nothing to do with dark jade eyes or bare feet on cold slate, or the way a king had said her name like it was the most important word he'd learned all day. He was already there, sitting on the east terrace exactly where he'd told her the sightlines were better, with a lantern dimmed to its lowest setting and 2 cups of tea steaming on the stone beside him. You brought tea, she said. You brought a bigger telescope. He looked at the instrument case strapped to her back, and something flickered across his face. Warmth. That same unguarded warmth that kept slipping through the cracks in his composure like light through a shuttered window. She set up her equipment and began charting. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the sleeve of her coat, and asked questions. About the telescope's focal length. About why she used ink instead of graphite. About the difference between a navigation chart and a celestial survey, and why one was worth 10 times the other to the right buyer. She answered all of them. She answered with the fluency of someone who rarely got to talk about the thing she loved most, and the words came fast and full and slightly breathless. You do this alone, he said at one point. Not a question. An observation, made with the careful attention of someone who was listening to what she wasn't saying. Always. By choice. She lowered the telescope, looked at him. His face in the dim lamplight, the sharp line of his jaw softened by shadows, those dark jade eyes steady and patient. By necessity. The outer territories don't have celestial programs. There's no funding, no apprenticeships, no one who thinks mapping stars is worth a commission. She shrugged. So I do it myself. That sounds lonely. It sounds free. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like he understood both the word she'd said and the one she hadn't. Neither of them touched. The glow stayed dormant. She told herself she was relieved. The third night, it rained. She climbed the drainage pipe in the downpour because she was stubborn, and because the cloud cover was supposed to break after midnight and she needed the measurements. She arrived on the east terrace soaked through, her silver blonde hair plastered to her face, her wool trousers heavy with water, and found Callum standing under a canvas awning he'd clearly had someone install that afternoon. "You had an awning put up," she said. "The tiles are slippery when wet." He held out a dry cloak. Heavy wool, lined with something soft. It smelled like him. Cedar and clean linen and something warmer underneath, something that made her lungs expand. "I asked the steward. For the structural integrity of the roof." She took the cloak. Their fingers touched. The glow returned. Brighter this time. Golden light pooling between their hands, warm and steady, casting their faces in soft amber. Linnea didn't pull away. Neither did he. They stood under the canvas awning with the rain hammering the slate around them and watched the light pulse gently, in time with something she realized was her own heartbeat. "It's getting stronger," she whispered. "I know." His voice was barely audible above the rain. His thumb traced a single slow line across her knuckles, and the glow intensified, spreading up her wrist like sunrise. Voice breaks. "Linnea, I'm not going to pretend this is just about stars." "I know. I've had people in this palace my entire life, advisors, generals, lords and ladies who smile at the right moments and say the right things, and not one of them has ever sat next to me and been genuinely passionate about something in front of me without wanting anything in return." He was looking at her with an openness that felt dangerous, like watching someone remove their armor in the middle of a battlefield. "You climbed a drainage pipe to map a constellation. You argued with me about stellar drift like I was your least favorite colleague. You didn't bow, you didn't perform, you just..." Pauses. "You were real." "So were you," she said, and meant it. The man who came to the rooftop with no shoes and no title and asked questions because he wanted to understand, not because he wanted to impress. "That's what scares me. What do you want to do about it?" The question. So simple, so terrifying, because what she wanted to do about it and what she should do about it were two entirely different things. She'd spent 3 years alone. 3 years of sleeping under open skies and answering to nothing but the turning of the heavens. She'd been free, truly free, and the thought of giving that up for anything, for anyone, even for a man who installed awnings and asked about parallax measurement and looked at her like she'd rearranged his understanding of the sky. "I don't know how to stay," she said. The words came out rough, honest, the truest thing she'd said in years. "I've never stayed anywhere. I don't know how to be someone who stays." He was quiet for a long time. The rain fell. The glow pulsed between their joined hands. Then don't stay," he said. "Come and go. Map every star in every territory. Send me your charts and I'll pin them to my study wall and argue with the court astronomer about why he's wrong." He turned her hand over in his, tracing the calluses on her palm, the ink stains on her fingertips, with a gentleness that made her chest crack open. "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking you to come back, here, to this roof." Pauses. "To me." She left the next morning. She told herself it was the right decision. She had commissions to complete. The Western Territories needed updated coastal charts, and the harbor masters were already complaining about delays. She packed her telescope and her field journals and walked out of the capital before dawn with the cloak folded at the bottom of her pack, because she couldn't bring herself to return it. She did not say goodbye. She left a note tucked beneath the teacup on the east terrace. 3 words. "Thank you, Callum." She'd rewritten it 6 times. The first draft was 4 pages long. The second was an apology. The third was something embarrassingly close to a confession. In the end, 3 words were all she could trust herself with. The first week was fine. She charted the western coastal sky from a cliff above Heroin Harbor, and the work was absorbing, and the view was spectacular. and she only thought about him every few hours. She told herself that was normal. She'd spent 4 nights with the man. 4 nights didn't change a life. 4 nights didn't rearrange the architecture of a person who'd been building walls for 3 years. Except 4 nights had included a luminescence bond. 4 nights had included a king with bare feet and genuine curiosity, and a voice that said her name like it was a constellation he'd just discovered. The second week was harder. She'd catch herself looking at the eastern sky and measuring the angle of the wolf's eye and thinking he'd want to know the cluster had shifted another half-degree south. She'd reach for her pen and realize she was writing observations in the margins of her charts addressed to no one. To him. Little notes like the court astronomer still hasn't updated his stellar drift calculations, and the harbor master thinks the River of Souls is a weather pattern. Please have him removed. She pressed her palm flat against the cliff rock one evening and stared at it, willing the golden glow to appear. It didn't. The bond didn't work that way. It needed him. It needed both of them. The third week, she couldn't sleep. She lay on the cliff above the harbor with the stars spread above her like a familiar language, and felt the absence of him like a cold spot in her chest, an emptiness where the glow should have been. She pressed her hand to the stone beneath her and felt nothing. No warmth, no light, just rock. She'd spent 3 years alone, and it had never felt like this. It had never felt like missing something she didn't know she needed. She packed her things at midnight and walked east. It took her 4 days to reach the capital. She climbed the drainage pipe at 20 minutes past 11 and pulled herself onto the east terrace with shaking arms and a heartbeat that sounded like thunder in her own ears. He was there. Of course, he was there. Sitting on the slate with his bare feet and his sleeves pushed up, and a cup of tea that had gone cold beside him. There was a second cup. There had always been a second cup. Every night for 3 weeks, he'd brought 2 cups to a rooftop and waited for a woman who might never come back. And something about that quiet, stubborn faith shattered the last wall she had left. When he heard the scrape of her boots on the copper gutter, he turned, and those jade-green eyes found hers in the dark, and the expression on his face almost undid her. Relief. Pure, devastating relief. The face of a man who had not allowed himself to hope and was now drowning in it. He stood. She could see that he hadn't been sleeping well. There were shadows beneath his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that hadn't been there before, and she realized with a lurch that the absence had cost him too, that whatever the bond was, whatever the luminescence meant, it had been pulling at him with the same relentless ache. The cluster shifted, she said. Her voice was unsteady. Her hands were shaking. 1/2 degree south. I thought you'd want to know. He stood, slowly, like he was afraid that moving too fast would make her bolt. He crossed the terrace toward her, and with every step the cold spot in her chest thawed and the golden warmth returned, spreading through her ribs, her lungs, her fingertips. You came back, he said. I don't know how to do this. She was breathing too fast. I don't know how to be someone who has a place to return to. I've never... Voice breaks. I'm terrified that if I let myself want this, I'll lose every part of myself that I... Linnea. Her name in his mouth, low and rough and reverent, like a prayer he'd been saying in the dark for weeks. You're standing on a roof you illegally climbed because you wanted to tell me about a star that moved 1/2 degree. You crossed 3 territories in 4 days because you missed arguing with me about celestial navigation. He was close now. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the sleeplessness, the evidence that the last 3 weeks had cost him something too. You haven't lost yourself. You found your way back. She kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. One moment she was standing on the edge of everything she'd ever been afraid of, and the next her hands were in his hair, and her mouth was on his, and the world ignited. The glow erupted. Not faint this time, not a tentative pulse. It blazed from everywhere they touched, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist, the press of his chest against hers, golden light pouring between them like they'd swallowed the sun. It lit up the entire terrace. It lit up the sky. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, and she was crying and kissing him and laughing all at once. He kissed her back like she was the answer to a question he'd spent his whole life asking. His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks, and the golden light pulsed between them in time with their heartbeats. Synchronized now, perfectly matched, two people who had been alone by choice discovering that choosing each other didn't make them less themselves. It made them more. When they finally broke apart, he kept his hands on her face. His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones. His breath was ragged and his eyes were bright, and the glow between them settled into a warm, constant luminescence that turned the rooftop into something sacred. "You're shaking," he said. "I walked for 4 days." "You could have sent a courier. A courier couldn't do this." She kissed him again, softer, slower. The kind of kiss that was less about urgency and more about certainty, about the quiet, terrifying decision to stop running and stand still long enough to be found. "I'll go," she said against his mouth. "I'll travel and chart and send you updated maps and argue with harbor masters. And you'll come back." "I'll always come back." She pulled away just far enough to look at him, his face in the golden light. Those jade-green eyes bright with something that looked like joy and wonder, and the particular vulnerability of a man who had everything except the one thing he wanted most. "This roof, this sky, you." He pressed his forehead to hers. The glow settled into something warm and steady, a soft golden radiance that wrapped around them both like a second atmosphere. "Then I'll be here. Every night. Tea on the stone. Awning up, court astronomer thoroughly intimidated." She laughed. It came out broken and raw and real, and he caught it with another kiss, softer this time, the kind that promised everything that words couldn't carry. Above them, the stars turned. The unmapped cluster burned bright in the eastern sky. And on the rooftop of a palace that was never meant for climbing, a woman who'd spent her life running discovered that the most terrifying map she'd ever draw was the one that led her home. 3 months later, the observatory on the East Wing had been Callum's idea. Linnea had called it excessive. He'd called it strategic resource allocation for the Crown's cartographic division, which was a fancy way of saying he'd built her a room with a retractable ceiling and a permanent telescope mount and enough desk space for 6 months of charts. She was lying on the observation platform with her journal propped against her knees, plotting the final positions of the cluster she'd been tracking for over a year. It had a name now. She'd submitted the formal designation to the Cartographic Council last month, after Callum had looked at her field notes and said, entirely seriously, that she should name it after herself. She'd named it the Wanderer's Crown instead. He'd pretended to be offended. She'd caught him telling the court astronomer about it with so much pride in his voice that the old man had turned pale and started updating his charts that same afternoon. Her latest coastal survey was pinned to the far wall, next to 3 territorial maps and a framed copy of the first chart she'd drawn on the palace roof, the one with the ink smear from when he'd said "room for 2," and she'd nearly dropped her pen. He'd had it framed without asking. She'd found it hanging in his study one morning and stood in front of it for a long time, touching the glass over the smudge, feeling something vast and warm and settled in her chest. She still traveled. Last month she'd spent 12 days in the Northern Ridge Territories, mapping a stretch of sky that no cartographer had surveyed in 50 years. She'd sent him a chart every 3rd day by courier, with observations written in the margins. He'd sent back the couriers with tea, warm socks, and detailed annotations about the territorial implications of her sightline calculations. One note had simply read, "The court astronomer cried when he saw your drift corrections." I'm framing his resignation letter. Footsteps on the stairs. Bare feet on stone. She knew the rhythm of them by now, as familiar to her as the turning of the constellations. It's 1 in the morning, she said without looking up. And yet, here I am. He appeared in the doorway of the observatory, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing that expression he got when he'd been reading her latest charts and had questions. He set the tea down beside her journal, lowered himself onto the platform, and rested his head against her shoulder. The glow bloomed where their skin met. Soft, golden, steady. The coastal charts are finished, she said. The harbor masters will have updated copies by the end of the month. He shifted closer. His breath was warm against her collarbone. And then? Then the Northern Ridge survey. 3 weeks in the field, maybe 4. I'll have the awning reinforced. She smiled, set down her pen, turned her head to press a kiss to the top of his hair, the deep umber strands soft against her lips. Below them, the palace slept. Above them, the Wanderer's crown blazed in the eastern sky, no longer unmapped, no longer invisible, no longer alone. Callum. Thank you for not making me choose. He lifted his head. Those dark jade-green eyes soft now, warm, holding every night he'd spent on the roof waiting for her with the same steady patience that had made her trust him in the first place. You chose anyway. I chose both. She laced her fingers through his. The glow brightened, gentle and sure. The sky and the roof, the wandering and the coming home. I chose both. He kissed her hand, slow, deliberate. The light between their fingers was golden and steady, a small sun of their own making. Both is good, he murmured. She picked up her pen. He settled his head back against her shoulder. And somewhere in the margins of her newest chart, in handwriting that was precise and certain and entirely her own, she wrote, "Observed from home."